This is Christopher Sernaque, hosting Episode 8 of Season 1 of the Current Topics in Science podcast. This podcast will address breaking scientific news in light of the origins debate and host interviews with scientists. This podcast is available on the following platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Video recordings of this podcast will be uploaded to YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Today on Current Topics in Science, we have the honor of hosting Doug Bame. He is a dog behaviorist, professional canine caretaker, dog trainer, and dog handler. Doug has studied at State University of New York and is the operator of Puppy Avenue, otherwise known as Jacksonville's favorite puppy store. Doug Bame has had over 30 years of experience in taking care of man's best friend and will be walking us through his own Christian experience with God and shed light on the origin of dogs. Are dogs the product of evolution, or are they testaments to the creative glory of God? Before we get into the interview, if you ever find yourself in the Jacksonville area, please come and visit Puppy Avenue. Over at Puppy Avenue, all puppies come from licensed USDA breeders, and measures are taken to ensure their perfect health. Now, without further ado, good morning, Doug. How was your day and how are you?
Oh, thank you for such a wonderful introduction, Chris. I am just blessed by God's good grace, and thank you for having me on today.
No, you're more than welcome. It's an honor. Now, since this is Current Topics in Science, we will quickly look at this week's current topic. The American Association for the Advancement of Science has reported some interesting discoveries about man's best friend. Jack London, in his book Call of the Wild, once said that his sled dog Buck had superb tracking skills because he was led not by sight or sound or smell, but by some other and subtler sense. According to the study, dogs have noses that are up to 100 times more sensitive than our own. Because of this sensitivity, the nose of a dog can detect thermal radiation or body heat of their prey or subject. According to Virginia Morell, who in the journal Science magazine wrote, most mammals have naked, smooth skin on the tips of their noses around their nostrils. But dogs' nose tips are moist, colder than the ambient temperature, and richly endowed with nerves, all of which suggest an ability to detect not just smell, but heat." End quote. Doug, after hearing this astounding fact about dogs, I'm sure that it's brought to mind some memories of your experience in working with dogs. What do you think about this current topic, and what are some of the most amazing facts about dogs?
Oh, that's a great question. First of all, dogs, they say that we're going to live 2 years longer if we have a dog. That's because it takes us about 2,000 more steps during the course of the day if we own a dog. So it's good for man, it's good for dog. I think with the topic of evolution with dogs and dogs' ability to smell, I think it's even greater than 100 times better than us in their senses. It's just amazing to be able to sniff out cancer, to be able to sniff out termites, bed bugs, all these different things that dogs have been trained to do to help us.
That's absolutely amazing. Now, I did some research on dogs prior to having you on the show. I found that some dog specialists divide dogs into 4 basic varieties, namely the wolf-like dogs like the Siberian Husky, guard dogs like the German Shepherds, herders like the sheepdogs, and hunters like the Beagle. Now, you've come across all these dogs and more, but out of all of the canines you've encountered or studied, who is your favorite dog?
That's a great question. Well, and I just will add to that, the American Kennel Club has divided 200, I think it's over 200 breeds into 7 groups. Okay, and if you ever go to a dog show, it's 7 groups. I'll see if I can remember them all. The working group is the group that I'm most familiar with. Those are dogs that were bred to do jobs like the Husky, like the St. Bernard, which is my personal favorite. I started with St. Bernards right out of college in the 80s and still have one pair of them, but I still show them as a hobby and work with them every day.
Well, that was fantastic. No, I appreciate it. And you said it was the St. Bernard that was your favorite.
Oh yeah.
You gotta love them. They're really beautiful dogs. Now, I wanted to ask you another question. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, and God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." End quote. How does this dominion mandate relate to your experience, Doug, as a dog behavioralist?
Man, first of all, I just want to cry out, hallelujah. Thank you for sharing those verses. It's just so awesome to hear those words. Well, it's man that has made the breeds what they are today. All breeds are breeds of mixed breeds. Kind of, I guess you could compare it to people, but one of the things is DNA in dogs is very highly controversial. It's not something that you could use in court, like if you buy a dog and they sell it to you as a purebred Chihuahua and it has all its registration paperwork, pedigree, and then you send in a DNA kit and it comes back that your Chihuahua is got part Boston Terrier, part Rat Terrier, certain things. That's just because it's all those breeds are in the Chihuahua, and we have designed them to do different things. We were talking earlier about the working group, about using dogs, all the amazing things dogs do for man. So I'm getting ready to get into a good topic here with you on, did dogs come from wolves? That might be one of your questions, because scientists say that all dogs come from wolves.
Sure. I was actually going to get into the next question on how evolutionists view dogs. I'm going to read that one, and then maybe what you were about to say will tie into the next question. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm now going to read a quote from Cody Guittard. He's a biologist from Crandall University. He writes, "Evolutionists like to present the rapid diversification of domestic dogs as a supposed observation of evolution in action. However, this is a clear case of equivocation, for the variation observed in dogs is not the same kind of change necessary for molecules to man, or more appropriately here, molecules to dog evolution. Functional and phenotypic differences which distinguish the various breeds of domestic dogs are not the products of evolution, which require the creation of new genetic information, but the selection, manipulation, and mutation of pre-existing genetic information. Artificial selection actually depletes the genetic potential in the gene pool, rendering each generation of offspring less adaptable than the previous ones to future environmental changes. While these data are in no way of evidence for evolution, they do fit well within the young Earth creation model, wherein the basic created candid kind or type has a pool of genetic potential for interkind variation, but not interkind variation." End quote. Doug, in light of this statement, or from your personal study and experience, why are dogs evidence for creation and not for evolution.
I think dogs, the word that screams out to me more is domestication. I think that they were created, and wolves could be part of the solution. You know, we don't exactly know what was put on the earth. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I believe that the dogs are a combination of different animals that man domesticated.
That's interesting. There's a scientist, his name is Dr. Jonathan Sarfati. He said that creationists have often pointed out that Noah didn't need to take wolves, foxes, coyotes, dingoes, chihuahuas, Great Danes, spaniels, dachshunds, etc. on the ark, because the animals on the ark had the potential for diversifying into different varieties. And so what's interesting is that our next question actually ties in to what we had just previously spoke about. There's a zoologist by the name of Austin H. Clark, and he said that gaps are found in all of these evolutionary lines, and many of these gaps appear to be real. That is, they were never, so far as we've been able to learn, bridged by so-called missing links. To take a concrete example, it is quite obvious that the gap between cats and dogs is broad, and it remains broad throughout the fossil record. Cats never became dogs, nor dogs cats, but both are carnivorous mammals. The theory of evolution predicts the common ancestry of all living organisms, and so somewhere along the lines, according to the evolutionary theory, cats and dogs shared a common ancestor. Doug, why is the idea that cats and dogs are related inaccurate?
I don't think they're related. I think more, I'm going to spin this a little bit, something I want to get off my chest, because you look at the different continents, like the land down under, they have the dingo. Mm-hmm. You look at the African continent, they have the painted dog. And then North America and in Europe, they have the wolf. And, you know, I just believe that man domesticated these and then swapped and traded, and eventually through domestication we came up with all these different breeds.
That's interesting. And so with regards to the quote about cats and dogs having a common ancestor, do you see any evidence for the ancestry of cats and dogs being related?
I don't believe that. There's one breed called the Shiba Inu. It's a Japanese breed, and in 1939 it became the most popular dog in Japan. Shiba Inu means bushwood dog. They say that this is the most feline of all dogs. But cats are feline. They're completely different. I do believe, in the wild, they've had lions and tigers have actually in the wild. I know they've domesticated those two breeds and they've bred them together to get a liker, okay? But I don't believe that. But I've seen marsupials, or you take fox, and you look at a fox and you look at like a Pomeranian, and they look so similar. It's really hard not to believe that somehow that they could have had fox in them.
That's really interesting. And so you mentioned actually domestication a few times in your previous statements. I wanted to ask you a question on domestication. So the book of Job, it chronicles the life of one of God's servants who lived after the Genesis flood. Job, in Job chapter 30 and verse 1, speaks about the dogs of my flock. So we find that even people in the Bible owned domestic dogs and appreciated their presence. Doug, how has taking care of dogs been a blessing to you?
I remember when I was a young man, my mom used to always say to me, you get on your own, you can have as many dogs as you want. And today I truly do. I travel with two dogs, a golden retriever and a St. Bernard. You can see from the pictures, we've been so blessed. We go to all the different kennels. If you ever come into our store, you'll see where we have video of the kennels that the dogs come from. And just been so blessed to bring these dogs with me. In my travels, I don't have a passenger seat. I make it so the dogs can come right up and sit right up front with me. And have that motorcycle sidecar. And they just, they're so forgiving. They never stay upset with you. And as I set my second stage in life here, getting ready to turn 55 years old, it's just a blessing to be able to live out my dream, which is be around my dogs. I'm so blessed to be able to be with them all day. As I'm riding down the highway on my motorcycle with my dogs, I look back at my grand dog, Blake, the golden retriever, and he's just smiling. He's got the biggest smile. You know, you don't have to be a dog behavioralist to see a happy dog, a dog wagging its tail, a dog that looks like it's smiling in its face. So thank you so much for that question. As a young man, I always wanted to work with animals. My grandfather, who I grew up next to, he always warned me. He would say, Dougie, that's what he called me, don't make a living with animals. If you're going to have animals, you're going to have problems. Unfortunately, we're going to have problems in our life, but animals just make it so much easier to deal with, having them next to you. That's why we have support dogs, and the military is using not only dogs in the military, but for the servicemen that have severe trauma for after being in the military, and using these as companion dogs. And we hear stories all the time on TV about how dogs are helping veterans coming back that have need a companion. So great question, Chris. Thank you.
Doug, thank you very much for taking your time. It was an absolute joy. To our listeners, thank you very much for listening and taking the time to learn with us on current topics in science, where scientific discoveries are examined in light of the origins issue. Please share and subscribe to the Current Topics in Science podcast. It is available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. You can find the link to Puppy Avenue's website and address in the description below. Thanks again for listening, and remember, the truth saves.